It began with a splash, sharp, unnatural, and out of place in the frozen silence of the northern lake. A wooden crate drifted half submerged, and inside it, something fought to live. When Mason pulled the soaked, half-drowned bobcat from the water, he thought he was saving a wild animal. But what he didn't know was that this creature, trembling and gasping beneath the gray sky, was about to become something far more than that. In the days that followed, the bobcat didn't just survive, she returned. Night after night, sitting at the edge of the trees, silent and watching, until finally, she stepped into the warmth of his fire. And in that fragile moment, with snow falling softly outside and the wild staring him in the eyes, Mason realized this wasn't just a rescue. It was a reckoning, for her, for him, for something broken in both of them that was finally beginning to heal. We thought it was just a crate drifting in the icy lake, until we heard the scream. What we pulled from the water wasn't just a bobcat. She was barely breathing, trembling, and left to die like trash. But what she became, no one was ready for. If you believe every life, no matter how wild or broken, deserves a second chance, then subscribe. We tell real stories that remind us of the quiet bonds between humans and nature. And trust me, what's coming next will stay with you. She didn't just survive, she chose to trust again. If you felt that type, still wild, still worthy, in the comments. The cold had a way of silencing the world out here. Not the soft hush of snow, but the kind of cold that turned breath to smoke and trees to statues, still and listening. It was the sort of winter that made even time hesitate. The sky stretched like pale steel above the lake, and the forest around it frozen in prayer. Mason liked it that way. The farther he got from cities and people and memory, the easier it became to breathe. He had come to the northern woods to disappear, at least for a while. A month off-grid, tucked inside a half-rotted ranger's cabin near a lake that rarely showed up on maps. It was supposed to be empty out here. No roads, no cell towers, just wind, snow, and the occasional echo of a distant wolf. Solitude wasn't something he feared. It was something he needed, especially now. But that morning, just as the first light cut across the icy lake, something wasn't right. He'd stepped outside with a steaming cup of instant coffee, the air biting his cheeks, when the silence cracked. A splash, sharp and unnatural, rippled across the stillness. Then, a second sound, high-pitched, guttural, and panicked. Not human, but not far from it either. Mason paused, head tilted toward the lake. The trees rustled behind him, but the cry came again, clearer this time, desperate, alive. He moved before thinking, instinct maybe, or something deeper. His boots crunched over the snow as he ran toward the lake's edge. The sky above had turned the color of ash, and the wind picked up like it was trying to push him back. That's when he saw it. A wooden crate, half submerged near the edge of the lake, broken open, bobbing gently between thin sheets of ice. And beside it, fur. A mottled, shivering mass of soaked fur, flailing weakly in the water. Claws raked at the edge of the ice, but it gave no grip. The creature's head jerked above the surface, wild amber eyes locking on his for a single breathless second, before slipping under again. A bobcat. The realization hit him harder than the cold. Someone had dumped her here, bound her, locked her in that crate, and left her to die in the most brutal way imaginable. Jesus! Mason dropped his mug and charged into the shallows. The water hit like knives. He stumbled once as the slick, half-frozen mud gave way beneath him. His jeans soaked through instantly. Ice cracked around his boots with each step. The water reached his thighs now, but he didn't care. He was close. The bobcat surfaced again, choking, her body limp but still moving, just barely. He lunged, grabbing at her scruff with one hand, the other trying to support her soaked frame. She twisted in his grip, teeth snapping wildly. A low, gargled growl escaped her, full of fear and fury. She was terrified, and rightfully so. "Easy! Easy!" Mason gritted his teeth, pulling her toward the bank, ignoring the freezing pain climbing up his legs. She wasn't heavy, but the water made her dead weight. She kept thrashing until finally, with one final shove, he dragged her onto the snow-covered ground, both of them gasping, soaked, and trembling. She lay motionless now. Steam rose from her body as the air hit her fur. Her breath came in sharp, shallow bursts. her ribs fluttering. The rope was still tangled around one hind leg, frayed, soaked, and cruel. Mason dropped to his knees beside her, chest heaving, the cold sinking deeper now. His fingertips ached, his thighs were numb. But none of that mattered. All he could do was stare at her, this wild, broken thing who should have been. Dead by now, and the worst part? Someone had meant for her to be. The wind howled low through the trees, as if mourning something unseen. And in that moment, beneath the ice-cut sky, Mason understood. This wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something neither of them saw coming. She didn't stop fighting, even as the water drained from her lungs in short, rasping bursts. Even as her body sagged on the snow-covered earth, half drowned and shaking, she fought. Mason had seen fear before, on the faces of people in hospital rooms, in his own reflection after loss, but never like this. This was wild terror, the kind that came not from instinct alone, but from betrayal. She didn't know he had saved her. She only knew that another human had hurt her, and she wasn't going to go quietly into another set of hands. The Bobcat thrashed the moment his jacket touched her. With a startling burst of strength, she rolled sideways, hissing low and guttural, baring her teeth with a voice that sounded torn from somewhere deep. Her soaked fur clung to her ribs like matted weeds. One eye squeezed shut, the other locked on Mason, wide, golden, unblinking. "Okay," he whispered, holding his hands up. "You're okay. I'm not going to hurt you." But she didn't understand words. She only understood movement, heat, pain. He kept his distance, kneeling in the snow a few feet away as the storm winds picked up around them, howling low like mourners. Above them, the trees bent under the weight of cold. His legs ached from the icy water, now freezing into stiff, rigid sheets along the seams of his jeans. But Mason didn't move. He couldn't. Not yet. She was still too close to death, still hovering in that fragile place between fight and surrender. If he moved wrong, if he tried too hard, she might bolt. And in her condition, she wouldn't make it far. The cold would finish what the water started. He unzipped his coat again and set it gently on the snow near her, not touching her this time, just offering it. Steam rose slowly from her body as the fire of survival faded to exhaustion. Her flanks heaved with each breath. Every inch of her shivered, not from cold anymore, but from something deeper, fear like poison in the blood. Then, after what felt like hours, her eyes fluttered closed, still breathing, still alive, but no longer fighting. That was the first gift she gave him, stillness. Mason exhaled and sat back, legs numb, fingertips stinging. The wind died a little. In the distance, somewhere past the white ridge, a lone raven called out into the silence, then was gone. There was a strange stillness in the world after that. Not peace exactly, but pause. For the first time in a long while, Mason didn't feel the pressure to move, to fix, to run from his thoughts. He just sat there beside her, feeling her quiet presence next to his, watching the steam curl from her coat-covered body as the winter wrapped around them both. A memory surfaced, a hospital bed. His wife's hand, frail and cold in his own. The moment she let go was like this. Not a cry, not a collapse, just stillness. The world didn't end with a scream, it ended with a whisper. Now, beside this broken wild creature who refused to die, something inside him whispered again. Maybe not an ending, maybe a beginning. He reached out slowly, fingers hovering just above her fur. Not touching, just close enough to feel the fragile warmth pulsing beneath it. "You made it," he said softly. She didn't stir, didn't growl, just lay there, silent, breathing, alive. The snow began to fall again, gently this time. Thin flakes swirling in the cold air, settling on the ground like ash from some distant fire. And Mason knew, with a quiet certainty, that he couldn't leave her here. Not even if she turned on him, not even if she tried to kill him. Because something about her had already begun to shift the ice inside him. The kind of shift that doesn't crash or shatter, just melts. He stood, legs shaking, and pulled his coat tight around her fragile body. "You don't have to trust me yet," he murmured, "but I'm not leaving you." And then, with a grunt and a surge of breath, he lifted her into his arms. She didn't fight. She was too far gone for that now. But somewhere in her body, beneath the weight, beneath the cold, beneath the fear, was a tiny ember still burning. Mason carried her through the trees, back toward the crooked little cabin that sat on the edge of the world. Neither of them knew it yet, but that walk, just a few hundred steps through frozen woods, was where the bond began, not in the rescue, not in the stillness, but in the choice to carry what couldn't walk away. The old cabin groaned when the door opened, as if surprised to feel life again. Mason kicked it shut with his heel, snow trailing in behind him, and set her down gently near the hearth. The place smelled of ash and pine, like old books left in a forgotten attic. The floorboards creaked beneath his, soaked boots, and every corner held a hush that hadn't been broken in years. The Bobcat barely moved. She was a trembling heap of wet fur on a flannel blanket he'd found in the storage chest by the cot. Her breath came shallow, eyes flickering open now and then, only to close again. But she was warm now, and she was inside. Mason dropped more logs onto the fire until the flames climbed like dancers. The heat licked across the room in slow waves, casting a soft glow that touched the walls, his face, and finally, her. He watched her from across the room. Even unconscious, she was all tension, ears twitching at every creak, muscles still drawn like a bowstring under her skin. Her survival instincts didn't shut off, not even in sleep. She didn't trust this warmth. She didn't trust this safety. Maybe she never had either. Mason sat on the opposite end of the room, beside the fireplace, rubbing his hands together, trying to shake the cold from his bones. But what lingered wasn't just the chill. It was the weight, the silent questions. Who would do this to her? Why leave her like that, tied, trapped, discarded like waste? And yet, despite all that, she had fought. She had screamed. She had clawed through death itself. He watched the firelight flicker across her fur, painting her in amber tones. And for a moment, something passed between them. Not a bond, not yet, but recognition. Two creatures pulled from the edge, both carrying wounds too deep for anyone else to see, both still here, somehow. He didn't try to name it. He didn't speak. He simply sat in the quiet. Night deepened around the cabin. Wind howled against the windows like distant voices, but inside, the fire cracked gently between them, an invisible bridge spanning fear, pain, and silence. The kind of warmth that didn't demand anything, the kind that just stayed. And in that stillness, for the first time, the Bobcat moved, not to flee, not to fight, but to turn her head slightly toward the fire. A small shift, a fragile choice. Mason didn't smile, didn't move closer. He just watched, and in the low light, between the hiss of wood and the weight of breath, something wild began to thaw. She didn't eat the first day, or the second. Mason had placed a bowl of shredded venison beside the blanket, warm, soft, laced with bone broth he'd simmered himself. But she only sniffed it once and turned away. Her ears stayed low, her eyes half-lidded but alert, always watching. Even when her body slept, her mind didn't. Trust, he realized, didn't arrive like a guest at the door. It crept in slowly, starved, cautious. He didn't push her, didn't speak much either. The cabin was quiet, except for the wind against the roof and the occasional snap from the fireplace. He spent most of his time at the window or working on small repairs, re-shimming a broken shelf, reinforcing the wood stove. He made sure she saw everything he did, no sudden movements, no false sweetness, just presence. She needed to learn his rhythm, and maybe, without realizing it, he needed hers too. By the third morning, the meat was gone. He didn't see her eat it, but the bowl was licked clean, and her eyes held a different kind of alertness now. Not just fear, but something flickering beneath it. Suspicion, perhaps. Or the beginning of curiosity. That afternoon, she stood. Her legs trembled beneath her weight. A flash of wild determination surged in her muscles as she tried to walk. But her hind leg, the one that had been tangled in rope, folded beneath her. She collapsed with a grunt and hissed at herself. Mason flinched but didn't move closer. He let her have her frustration. Her pride. Later that evening, as twilight bled across the snow outside, Mason sat on the floor near the fire, eating from a tin of stew. He didn't look at her, not directly, but he set another piece of venison down on a flat stone and nudged it slightly closer to her side of the room. And then he waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then, from the corner of his eye, movement, she approached slowly, body low, shoulders taut, her golden eyes never leaving his. She stepped over the blanket like it was still ice, her weight cautious, her wounded leg dragging. She paused at the meat, looked at him, looked back down, and ate. There was no noise between them, just the soft scrape of teeth on stone, the steady crackle of fire, and a deep, wordless understanding. I will not harm you. I will not ask anything of you, but I will stay. When she was done, she backed away, not hurried, not frantic, just controlled. She curled up again near the hearth, but this time her eyes drifted closed without resistance. And Mason? Mason finally let out a breath that he hadn't realized he was holding. It was just food, just a moment. But in a life like hers, where every bite had meant a fight, this small act was sacred. The next morning, when Mason woke, the bowl was already empty. The snow had begun to melt in patches, only slightly, just enough to expose the moss beneath the pines and let the roof of the cabin drip in slow, rhythmic taps. The bitter white world hadn't vanished, but it had softened, as if the land, like them, was beginning to breathe again. She was moving better now. Her limp hadn't vanished, but her strength had returned with startling speed. Mason often watched her from the corner of his eye as she prowled the edge of the room, her body low and elegant, testing the perimeter of the space. She never let him get too close, but she also no longer shrank when he moved. That, he realized, was its own kind of closeness. Sometimes she'd sit near the window, watching the woods. Her ears would twitch at distant calls, owls, coyotes, the heavy silence of deep snow. Something ancient still pulled at her from out there, the part of her that belonged to frost and blood and pine sap. And Mason knew, deep down, that he couldn't keep her. That was never the point. He hadn't saved her to own her. He'd saved her because something in her refusal to die had echoed his own, because he couldn't stand to see something wild abandoned like that. Not again. Still, when she looked out that window, part of him ached. He started leaving the cabin door open during the warmer afternoons, just a crack, an invitation. At first, she ignored it. Then one day, she stepped outside. She didn't bolt, she didn't vanish into the trees. She just stood there, on the porch, in the sun, blinking at the wide, endless world. Her fur shimmered in the light now, thick and healthy again. Her shoulder had scarred over, the rope burns now faint reminders of what she'd survived. She stayed out for nearly an hour. Mason didn't follow, he just watched from the shadow of the doorframe. When she finally turned back toward the cabin, her steps were calm. No panic, no threat. She crossed the threshold and returned to her place by the fire without a sound. And Mason felt something inside him shift. She had tasted the world again, and she had come back. Not because she was trapped, not because she was weak, but because, for now, she had chosen this place. That night, for the first time, she came closer. While Mason dozed in the chair by the hearth, the sound of soft paws stirred him. He opened one eye to find her just inches from his hand, not curled, not crouched, standing tall, watching him with those same golden eyes, but they weren't hard anymore. They were quiet. He didn't move, didn't breathe too loud, and then, like a whisper, she brushed her head once against his fingers before stepping away again. It was nothing. It was everything. The next morning, the door stayed shut. Not by force, by choice. She came broken from a world that tried to drown her. But in the silence of a forgotten cabin, something unexpected happened. She healed, not just in body, but in trust. Not because she was tamed, but because she was seen. And in that fragile space between fear and fire, the wild didn't run. It stayed,